Okay, well, welcome to our Open Access Week podcast from Onago. I'm in the hosting seat today. I'm Andrew Smith from Charlesworth as part of Onago, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be speaking to Fiona Hutton. Fiona is a leader in scientific publishing, known for pioneering work in open access and innovation. Currently at eLife and previously at Cambridge University Press. She spearheaded experimental journal models, such as the Research Directions journal series, Cambridge Prisms, and Experimental Results, all designed to expand inclusivity and the scope of scholarly publishing. With a strong commitment to experimentation, Fiona champions new publishing workflows that support transparency, responsiveness, and sharing of diverse research inputs, including negative and null results. So welcome, Fiona. I'm excited to be talking to you. You've worked on some really interesting models, and I'm really excited to kind of get into the new model that eLife is working on.
Brilliant. Nice to be here, Andrew, on Open Access Week. So looking forward to talking about some of the, exciting ways that publishing is moving forward, especially around sort of preprints and preprint review.
Excellent. Oh, well, let's jump straight into the conversation. So, the way I thought we could do it is we could kind of break this down into kind of three areas. So, what I really wanted to focus on first was the power of experimentation in publishing, especially around open access models. Obviously, open access has been around for probably 3 decades, is it now? I mean, I started 2 decades ago, and we were kind of just starting to roll it out. So, obviously, as a concept. Publishers have been working on this for a number of years, but I think in the last few years, as this obviously has accelerated, there's been some really exciting models. You've been at the forefront of developing some of these new models for scientific publishing, and I wonder if we could start by kind of sharing your views on experimentation and how innovation has shaped your approach to what's inspired and what's inspired you to create innovations like Research Directions, Experimental Results, and eLife's new model.
So, what's really helped me in the past is that I started out as a research scientist. So I really understand, what the problems of research scientists have in their everyday life. I did my PhD, my postdoc, worked in the lab, and, some of that has really informed the kind of ideas I've had. And I've been very lucky to be able to work in very sort of creative, forward-thinking organizations that have enabled me to experiment and do different things with research publishing. So I think as a scientist, I remember when the original letter came out from Varmus, Brown, and Eisen, and we were in the lab. I was at Columbia University at the time, and it was an open letter to scientific publishers about free access to research in the life sciences. So I remember being in the lab, signing that document at the time, and that's really fundamentally shaped how I've thought about science, because being a researcher in the lab and being up against paywalls was a very frustrating piece back at that time. So if I take sort of open access and open science as a starting point, I think that's informed many of the projects that I've been worked on and been involved in. But essentially, going back to your point about innovation, you've got to figure out what kind of problem that you're trying to solve. You approach it from a user-centric viewpoint. How can advances in technology help with that? Science and science research publishing is this very stage. We're still talking about the PDF. We're still talking about the research article that contains 6 experiments with a nice little narrative. Technology has moved on. Scientific publishing should move on. But also got to think about, what is the accepted norm and what actually are you trying to solve? And just don't think what the system can currently do. Think about better ways of doing publishing, and then figure out which parts of that, if the system doesn't fit around it, what parts of that are you going to shout about and argue for? So, for example, eLife has done some very bold moves in terms of its publishing model. But we're not an organization that's just been set up to run a nice journal in the life sciences with a community. Our funders have tasked us to change scientific publishing, and you've got to think about what your principles are and stick with those principles. So a lot of that also fundamentally forms the kind of experimentation that you're doing and what you're willing to kind of fight for. So I've been very fortunate that I've created a number of different journals and models during my career. For example, Experimental Results, which is a journal that I created while I was at Cambridge University Press. And that was dedicated to publishing negative null results and replication experiments. In terms of, from a scientific point of view, it was really an obvious thing to do. There's so much content out there that people worked on in the lab that never gets published. That might be replication experiments, might be negative results, but that's really fundamentally important to everybody else in your field that's working on a particular project. If you're only mapping the mountains and not the boring flat landscape, then you've kind of missed out a huge amount of scientific knowledge. And so therefore, something like experimental results was a really important thing to think about. Unfortunately, with the recognition and reward system, scientists, even though they say that they want to publish in a journal like that, there's not really enough incentive for them in the system. So even models that you sort of choose to do that works for science, there's other parts of the scientific infrastructure that are inhibiting people from participating in that. Now it's very good that the biomedical sciences, for instance, are publishing in preprints, because you don't need to necessarily go if it's a negative result or no result. You just want others in other labs to see what those results are. You don't necessarily have to put it through peer review and get it published in what people like to do, which is published in high impact journals. So the preprint landscape has opened everything up to scientists, not just from the West, but from the global research ecosystem, and they're able to publish in these preprint servers in a way that they never could before. So in many ways, the landscape has kind of moved on, and we've had the ability to think about how to solve those problems in different ways. With Research Directions, which was another journal series that I created at Cambridge University Press, that was really a journal series that was breaking down the research article into constituent pieces. So there would be a research question, the scientific research analysis, the results. So it was making sure that actually a research paper wasn't just one particular narrative. It was the constituent parts of different parts of the scientific life cycle. And that I thought that was really important, because different people work on different parts of that process, and some of that content could be peer reviewed in a journal, some of it could sit on the open research preprint platform at Cambridge. So in my head, that was a really nice example of how publishing could look in the future, going between constituent published parts of the process and parts of the scientific literature that didn't have to be peer reviewed, that could sit on a preprint platform, a publication model that we launched in 2022. So I also created a series of journals called the Cambridge Prisms, and that looked at sort of challenge-based issues that were addressed by interdisciplinary groups of researchers. So it brought people that were working in the field, from the research to the policy to different aspects, people that were working on the ground. So systems and processes addressing water, energy, extinction, plastics, mental health, all underpinned by structured review content. I originally started out in review publishing, so mapping out a subject field that was interdisciplinary was a really sort of creative part of those particular projects.
So it's really interesting what you're saying around preprints, because I always think of preprints as being able to publish quickly and obviously the benefits of getting results out quicker. Um, but the negative side, I suppose, is kind of less thought about. And there's obviously been a lot of debate over the years at panels I've been to in terms of negative results and replication studies. And it's interesting that the institutional context that researchers are working in didn't support the journal. But actually, are preprints really the place for those results? And is that able then to have a positive impact in terms of how things are taking forward? Because if nil results aren't reported, presumably other projects, quite possibly on other sides of the world, could then go down the same alleyway and find the same results. And actually, if those results had been open, accessible, they wouldn't. They'd have gone and invested in other areas.
Yeah, I mean, preprints, I think preprints are really important because it gets the science out quickly.
Mm.
But if you think in terms of if it's somebody that's working in an aligned area in a different lab, then they essentially can look at that research and see for themselves, if the experiments were conducted correctly, if the data is full, if they had the right sort of positive and negative controls in the data at the experimentation. I think in terms of preprints, what it enables people to do is just publish that research. Of course, there's quality indicators and there's a need to review that content because not everybody in those fields are going to understand it. So, or wider fields are going to understand it. So there is still the need to review that content. And that's where a model like eLife's model can come in, because what we're doing is we're reviewing and curating preprints, which is a really fundamental and important part of what we're trying to do. Provide quality indicators that is outside the norms of what a normal accept reject decision into a journal would look like. I think, the people talk about there's so much content and the problem is more people are publishing more. I think that there's two different things going on there. People are publishing more because they think they're going to get rewarded for it. And then there's other people that are publishing because actually they're interested in the science that they're doing. They're interested in sharing that with the other labs that are doing that research in order for them not to go and spend 2 years replicating the same research using another postdoc or PhD student doing the same work just because nobody knew that
Mhm.
experimentation was going on. I think many years ago, you would, if you went to a scientific conference, you would have a conversation with somebody in another lab and you'd realize, oh, actually, the two of us have been working on the same experiments for the last 2 years, ended up with negative results. That's just such a waste in the system. So the sort of more open that you can be about the research that you're working on
Mm.
is of good for the science. I appreciate that it might cause all of this content might cause problems for the publishing community, but that's a different story than actually for the scientific community. For the scientific community, it's worth all research being out there. It's a matter of trying to find it, curate it, review it. That's where the publisher comes in.
Excellent. I think that probably leads us nicely to eLife's new model. Obviously, eLife has been on a bit of a journey over the last few years from where it started through to the new model. It'd be kind of really interesting to get into the differences around how you're now curating preprints and publication.
Yeah, so we launched our new model at the end of January 2023. We've had more than sort of 14,000 submissions since that time point. What we're trying to do is review and curate preprints, and that's quite a different, as I said before, that's quite different to accepting and rejecting into a journal. So what we are saying is the science is already published in a preprint. That's the easiest way to get that research out there and looked at by other people in the field as quickly as possible. But of course, that research hasn't been reviewed. And for a lot of people, they need to see, what their peers might think of that particular content. So what eLife is doing is we're public reviewing the preprints, and we create something called an eLife assessment, and that looks at the article on two different axes. So one is the significance of the research, and two is whether there's the data and the research has been conducted correctly. So we're looking at the strength of evidence that supports what the claims of the author are. So we produce what's a small assessment that contains specific terms, and that enables an author to actually see a quality assessment on an individual article. Normally, they come to an article that's been accepted into a journal. They have to make a contextual judgment on that article, or that journal's got an impact factor of X, therefore this article must be this or that. What is known is that in journals, there's some articles that have huge numbers of citations because maybe they're a tool or a technology that lots of people use, and there's other articles that don't have that many citations. So this is trying to take it away from using citation count as a quality indicator for an article. It's looking at the content itself and providing a quality assessment that can be used in research assessment, because it gives a sort of contextual outline of what that paper is and what the editors and reviewers thought of that paper in itself. So I think that it helps people in the field. It helps the assessment of those scientists at particular institutes without this, metric that's a very blunt metric that doesn't really tell you anything.
And from the researcher perspective, what do they see as? Is that kind of a set of badges, or is it a report that sits alongside the article? How do they interpret what's sound and what's interesting from the metrics?
So there's it almost looks like an abstract, but it's an assessment that sits above the abstract in the paper, and that will sit above every abstract in every version. So because it's an all open science by first principle, every version of the preprint with the reviews and the assessment is published. So the most recent version will contain a link back to every single previous version, and you can see what's happened to that paper as it's gone along the process. So the author themselves will get on top of their paper, it says, this study is a landmark study, and the results are sound or whatever. There's a variety of different terms that the editors and reviewers can choose from. So it's a clear quality indicator that's a non-metric evaluation of the research in their manuscript.
Excellent. That's really exciting. I mean, it's really the industry's spoken a lot about moving away from impact factors, moving away from just citations, but actually having that working as a model is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. I was at the CERN Open Science meeting last month, and there was a survey done by Helmholtz University, and they had talked to the researchers, and almost all of them said, what they were asked, what are you judged by now, and what would you like to be judged by? And there was a clear answer that came out. Non-metric quality evaluation on their research is what they would like to be judged by, but they realize they're not being judged by that at this point in time. So this is a model, a way to move away and provide that article level assessment on research articles.
And what's the feedback been so far from authors to the new model?
Well, our authors really like the new model. They're always saying it's a better system because there's much more control for them over what they do with their article. What we are trying to do is say to authors, well, here's a version 1 that contains this assessment. Do you want to continue with the process with us, or do you want to do something different with your article? We're not dictating to our authors what they do next. It's not like they send their article to a journal and then they don't hear anything for 9 months, a year, and then it's either accepted or rejected. We're actually having an open conversation
Mm.
with the authors. And so for them, this is kind of scientific discourse in action. And a lot of the people that we talk to, that's why they're in science. They want to see a better way of doing publishing, and they see this kind of open discourse
Yeah.
and evaluation process is really key fundamental part to that.
And for authors listening who are obviously working in the institutional context of, potentially impact factors where they've been encouraged to publish, what would you say to them around staying open in terms of these innovative models, these models that are really kind of starting to get to grips with actually some of the problems their scientists are trying to solve?
Yeah, I mean, often scientists they're stuck between difficult situation. Their institutions are demanding one thing. They're saying at the same time that they don't appreciate the system that they're publishing in. And a lot of our authors anyway are always complaining to us about the system and that it needs change and it's broken, etc. So all I would say to any scientist working in the field is, why are you in science? Are you in science to progress
Mm.
the field, to progress science, or are you in science to think about a shiny badge or feed into a system that you don't agree with? It's all about your principles. People have to decide what their own principles are and stick with that. But obviously, if people want change, then there has to be a collective will for change. You can't just talk about change and not participate in the change. So what we're trying to do with eLife is show people a way that research publishing can be different. And then it's up to the community collectively to say, actually, that's a good idea, that's what we want to do, and then show that they want to do it that way.
Yeah. Your work has obviously challenged the traditional publishing norms, the traditional models that many of us have known for many years. Um, Looking kind of back at your previous experience and then recent experience with the eLife model, what would you kind of say the main lessons that you've learned over the last few years, kind of challenging those norms and testing different models?
I think, what's really interesting is the structure, the structures that are in place that actually restrict any change in the system. There's so many different bodies that are trying to drive change, looking for change, but it can't be done by a single organization. There has to be a collective will about change. So in order, I attended the Future of Publishing at the Royal Society meeting, and there seemed to be a consensus in the whole room that that publishing had to be divorced from research assessment, and the whole community needs to figure out how to do that. So it'd be really interesting to see, what the outputs of that Royal Society report will be on that, because all of the people in the room collectively were saying, we need some change in the system, because all of these different experiments can't really go anywhere
Mm.
unless the whole system changes. So I think it's what we need is a collaborative, clear path forward, and it would be interesting to see if organizations like the Royal Society are willing to, take that lead.
And kind of looking at some of the recent changes with new models, what's your view in terms of the financial sustainability of some of them and kind of how we take that forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that business models need to evolve to reflect the change in publishing practices. One without the other isn't really good business practice, and publishing needs to be sustainable. Somebody has to pay for it. There's not open source tools that are available without substantial investment. A lot of people are thinking, let's get involved in this open source publishing landscape, but that continually needs funding. And so the funder, the research community, if they want to do things differently, then funders and institutions need to redirect some of their funding into supporting these kind of tools and technologies and into business models that align with their values. So they have to plan not just for the next 5 years, oh, I'll support this model for a couple of years or support this initiative for a few years. You have to think about, the next 20 years. What does it need in order to cause substantial change? And I know that, for eLife and other publishers such as PLOS, we're starting to look at business models that also move beyond the APC and open access. And I think there's going to be an awful lot of innovation around that in the next year or two. But there's a clear need to change the business models to adapt to the changing landscape.
Yeah. And I suppose the financial model and what you were saying about the research community is kind of linked to what do you see as kind of the biggest challenges in terms of working with communities and researchers to really kind of agree what the future needs to look like and actually how to not just embrace the models but also to make them sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the research. Everything, everything goes back to the research and reward system. So, for example, when we rolled out the new eLife model, and it's clear that our model caused challenges to indexers, they made up policies in order to exclude us from, continuing. But, eLife is an organization that exists to challenge systems that are not working. And we're not an organization that are just going to comply with systems that are not governed by the scientific community and give up our principles in order to fit into a system that everybody is asking us to change by example. So I think, but because of this reward and recognition system, for example, researchers in China for eLife's new models, some of them felt they could no longer publish in eLife. I've got comments from some of these researchers in complete despair because they agree with the model, they want to publish in the model, they thought the model was much better than anything they've published in. But because of the structures that they have to comply with, and they've got no power to change, they couldn't necessarily publish with us. So I think that countries, governments, funders need to question that we're in a system about who's actually thinking about Open Access Week and the question who owns our knowledge. It's very clearly not the scientific community.
And yeah, it's interesting in China because the policies split often between different organizations. So you have kind of subscriptions in one place, you have APC funding in another, and then obviously the kind of reward around impact factor is it makes it kind of difficult to change, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, it's not the Chinese government that is creating these policies. It's these policies are being created by organizations that
Mm.
the scientific community have no control over, are not governed by. So I think that's a question for the community to think very deeply about that.
And we've touched a bit on inclusivity of research globally. We've talked a little bit about China and some of the activities that eLife's been doing. Obviously, one of the criticisms of the APC model is that not everyone has funding to pay those APCs. And especially if they're in countries that don't have the waivers, but they themselves don't have funding. What do you kind of see as the real challenges to that broader inclusivity globally, especially as so much research now is done outside of major Western economies? There's so many growing research projects globally.
Yeah, I mean, how can you represent scientists and understand what they need if you're only involving scientists from rich Western-based university, select group of undiverse individuals? It's really important in order for not just access but participation. And there's been a lot of work around that recently. I was involved in a group. We rolled out a tool. How equitable is it? And I think many, as I said before, many organizations are looking to move beyond the APC. With eLife, we have a blanket waiver policy, so we don't discriminate whether somebody's in a particular country or not. If they ask eLife if they can have a waiver because they can't afford to pay the APC, then that's what eLife has always done. But that's not enough because a lot of people in different countries are saying, well, we don't want to ask for a waiver. We want a more equitable system. And so, as I said before, it's about the business models. How can we adapt and change business models to make them more equitable and fair, so that everybody can participate? There is a lot of work being done on that by eLife and other organisations as well.
So, as open access and preprint policies expand across institutions and funders, how can we ensure greater alignment and build trust amongst researchers, publishers, and policymakers?
It should be easy. Why it's not easy, I don't know. If the focus is on science, then we should all be coming to the table with the same agenda. You can already see that funders are rolling out policies and preprints like Gates and now HHMI. Many of the institutes we talk to are interested in funding new models and want to direct their money in that direction. So there's a momentum to recognize a better way of doing publishing, a more transparent system, and ultimately publishers give the market what it needs and it adapts to whatever the need is. So if the market is calling for a specific direction, then publishers inevitably all get on board because that's their business interests. So I think maybe we all battle for little silos. Maybe the focus should be on like what is better for scientists or science, the scientific endeavor, and how can we all get together and contribute to that together as a collaborative group. So I think that's possible.
Kind of thinking about the author experience, how do you kind of see that changing with the new models, especially around kind of the curate create and review around preprints? That's quite a change from the traditional peer review models that have existed, and I suppose the kind of traditional submission and author journey.
Yeah, it is different, but I think it recognizes it recognizes what happened in the pandemic, that science moved faster because people were publishing preprints, and therefore, certain parts of knowledge about COVID and the COVID virus was getting out there very quickly. And so it's just recognizing actually when organizations come together and can do things rapidly because there was suddenly a lot of peer review of these preprints happening as a collaboration between the community and between publishers. It made everybody think like, what are we doing? This, if there's ever another situation, what's the most important thing is if research is getting done quickly, it needs to be get out there quickly. Yes, we still need to do the peer review and evaluation of that work, but obviously some of that work is getting built upon much earlier in the system. So in many ways, it's just a natural evolution about what is possible because
Mhm.
of technology, because of the way that we use the internet or tools, technology. There's no reason to hide that information when there's a system that's been shown to work in a pandemic.
Yeah.
Get the science out quickly, review it and assess it. Yes, some of it might not be very good, but some of that content is going to really help solve problems much more quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's the absolute the consensus at the moment around the technology. Do you kind of see the technology playing more of a speed, more of a place in terms of speed, so in terms of summarizing, helping people to actually do the reviews quicker, or do you think we should be using it to get a little bit deeper in terms of to identify more issues with the research projects or more issues with some of the results, and actually push that back to the author earlier, or yeah, it'd be interesting to see kind of your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think any technology that helps people process that information faster, that would take a human a lot longer to do. I think all of that is useful, and it can be done. As long as you do it carefully, and there's a sort of experimental process that you go through in order to see if it's working correctly.
So there's ongoing debates about preprints and quality control. And I was really interested in terms of your process of thinking about research integrity, how that's working to flag articles earlier to ensure that articles that are either fake or certainly aren't rigorous are not then having wider dissemination and further causing issues with other research projects.
Sure. In our process at eLife, we when articles are submitted, we run them through AI tool checks to check for plagiarism and paper mills, etc. So we're doing the same kind of quality control that any other journal is doing at that point. But I suppose if a journal is doing plagiarism screening and research integrity checking, but it isn't mandating that articles share all data and code, then that journal is not really taking rigor seriously, in my opinion. It's not even doing the basics. So I think we have to start there. But if preprints can evolve to incorporate all of these, the submissions of preprints, I think that's what we need to be looking at. I think that if those checks, and I know that some preprint servers are doing all those checks at the start of the process. I think it's the F1000 with the Gates Foundation. There's something like 20 checks in Very Archive. I think the other preprint servers are probably looking to do that in the future. But obviously, you're doing all those plagiarism checks, etc. But actually, that's not conducting the review. So our system is still taking the preprints and then reviewing and evaluating them. So, and that's the qualities of the quality markers that we're adding to those preprints. So, for our point of view, it's yes, there's preprints there, but they haven't been reviewed and curated yet, and that's what we're doing as an organization.
So I just wanted to move on a little bit, just to kind of talk more about the internal culture around innovation. As obviously, both Cambridge and eLife, you've pushed forward with new innovative models. And for publishers who were interested in experimentation, or for people within publishers who were really interested in terms of actually, can we try something different? I just wonder if you could talk a bit about how you create that spirit of innovation and how you can create that internally, and the kind of internal culture and internal processes you need to really be able to support that, but then to take what's a stress tested innovation out to market eventually.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been very lucky to work in organizations that have been, wanting to push the agenda. So, that helps, that openness from whoever sits on the board is very clear. With eLife, it was by the time I joined eLife, they had already decided to move forward with the publish review curate system. So my part of that process was making that happen for all the publishing systems within eLife. Within Cambridge University Press, I went to leadership team and said, look, here are some of the problems that we're trying to solve, and here are some ideas. So what we started out with was, I was head of STM Open Access Publishing at Cambridge, and what we did is get together a group of people from across the business and as a workshop, and said, okay, let's everybody come with their different ideas, and let's present it and talk about the benefits and negatives of those particular ideas, and see which ones we take forward. So it's been open and ensuring that everybody gets on board, because all of these projects are sort of cross-departmental. You have to get buy-in from a really wide group of stakeholders that are willing to think differently, willing to think about how to try new things. And then, of course, as somebody that's leading that process, you have to put together a good business case. You have to say, this is the reasons. You have to do your market research. You have to say, this is why the market wants this particular thing, and this is what advantages it will be to the organization. And you have to outline that very clearly, because you need to then go to, say, if you're going to a board. For me at CUP, it was going to the syndicate, and you have to convince them, a group of academics at the university. You have to say, we're doing this because of these particular reasons, and win that argument. So it's a complex but really creative process. And I think you need to make sure that the people at the top of the organization have bought into the idea. They want to have to see change and willing to drive change, and are open to new ideas. So, start out with that person who's the decision maker, and then work back from there and see if you can get a sort of groundswell of commitment and innovation together. And then it can be a great process, and everybody can get involved in that.
And for researchers looking to get involved in innovative publishing models, obviously as publishers, we know about WASPA, and there's various kind of resources out there to support us. But where would you kind of say a researcher should start with if they're really interested in becoming involved in a more innovative journal, or in actually looking at a specific innovation for a subject area?
Yeah. How can they get involved? So, for instance, at eLife, we put out calls. We have so many different groups. We have a Global South committee. We have open science ambassadors. We have an early career researcher group. We put out calls for people to join these different groups. They're involved in decision making. They're involved in our governance. It's not just eLife, there's other groups such as Pre-Review, ASAP Bio. There's lots of different organizations that are looking to bring in different voices, to make sure that everybody sort of participates in the system. So it's finding about what can you join, having a look around, making sure that there's options that are available to you, and then just volunteer to be part of it. And you never know who you might meet, what conversations you might have, and what you might end up involved in. And that's a really great way of trying to get involved.
Sounds good. And what excites you most about the future of scholarly publishing? Obviously, a very, very broad question, but what do you see as kind of the most exciting over the next 3 to 5 years?
I mean, the thing is, our community is full of sort of bright, passionate people trying to make a difference. There's lots of technology and AI evolution going on that could change everything. But as a community, I think, we have the skill set to embrace a change. Things might work out better for science in the long run if we try to experiment and do things differently, and we try different systems. I think everybody, should get involved in that, make a positive contribution. Fundamentally, for me, it's about, that evolution from the sort of preprint first. And I think that changes everything in how we look at the whole system. But I think, the opportunity is immense, and we just don't know where AI is going to take research publishing. But I think it'll be an interesting journey.
Oh, well, at that point, I'd say thank you, Fiona. This has been a really interesting conversation for Open Access Week. Fantastic. It's really interesting to hear the new model at eLife, and how preprints and publication are changing. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.